You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
President Biden's State of the Union address summarizes what the administration feels are important things to push through over the next year. What we want to know is how that affects convenience stores. Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I'm Chris Blasinsky with NACS.
Today, Chris and I are going to talk to Doug Kantor, NACS Chief Legal Counsel, about some of the issues that relate to convenience stores that came out of State of the Union. We don't want to talk necessarily about politics and whether we agree or disagree, but what we want to talk about is what could be the impact and maybe some opportunities for convenience stores. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with you've been around so many State of the Union addresses and looking at the analysis and going through what it all means. Can you kind of give us a summary of what the purpose of the State of the Union is and what are things that you look for in these messages?
Well, first, the State of the Union is a constitutional responsibility of the president to report to Congress on what's happening with the nation. It's been going on since the Constitution started with George Washington. And you have to think of it a little bit like the Super Bowl for the president, because it's the biggest audience. It's the time when everybody's attention is guaranteed to be there, which you don't know whether it will be the rest of the year. And so the president both talks about his or her priorities, but also it tends to get listy, as you saw in the State of the Union from President Biden, because you get the priorities from all the different federal agencies all going to the White House to say, please, please talk about this, talk about my priority. And so the president, who is ultimately just the executive leader of all these federal agencies, wants to show them all a little bit of attention and love. So it's laying out the agenda, but it does sometimes tend to run on a little longer than you might think.
And I assume that everybody that has a stake in being mentioned is at home or in the audience, just like all excited when their pet project or their pet initiative gets mentioned.
Absolutely. For cabinet secretaries, this is a big deal. If the president mentions their key issue, that sets them ablaze, working with their staff. Hey, this is now officially the president's big priority.
Before we
so
dive
one of
in,
the first 10 minutes or so were about the geopolitical conflict with Ukraine and Russia. And then later on, he mentioned, tapping the SPR and, adding oil to the global markets. Can we just talk about that for a second? Because, I believe he said 30 million barrels coming out of the SPR into the U.S. And then I don't remember the number that he said for global market. I think it was 60 million.
Yes.
What is that? Is that short term or long term?
So that is short term, 30 million out of the US SPR, 30 million for a total of 60 million from other places around the world.
Okay.
This is a reaction, obviously, to what's happening in Ukraine. And what's happening in Ukraine with Russia's invasion is really changing the politics around energy policy in some fundamental ways that could matter a lot to our members. There's been, as everyone knows, a huge push toward renewables and electric vehicles and things like that in the United States. The vulnerability of Europe, dependence on natural gas from Russia, but also the world's dependence on petroleum products from Russia, is causing some political pushback where people are saying, look, we have to develop traditional U.S. energy sources, petroleum and natural gas, more to insulate us from those dangers. So the SPR is a short-term answer from the president on that, But there are a lot of folks saying we need to go farther and talking about approving more pipelines, including Keystone, and getting more leases to drill on federal lands and those types of things. Those are not things this administration is particularly friendly to, but the pressures may build on them the higher gas prices go, that they may have to take some action.
We heard about the pain at the pump from President Biden. We heard about it in the rebuttal from Governor Reynolds, the Republican rebuttal. The SPR, or the 60 million barrels, it sounds like a lot. It's about a half a day of usage on the world market. So by itself, it won't affect things that dramatically, but what it does do is it sends a message, possibly to the markets, in how do you calm jittery markets that the day of the President Biden's address, oil prices spiked to its highest level in 8 years, over $100 a barrel. And it's this question of where will they go from here? So are these things somewhat trying to, whether it's the SPR or other things that the president may look at after this, really trying to calm jittery markets, or does it have a material impact?
Well, I think you have to look at the markets the president is focused on most intently, which are the political markets. Number one, he was speaking to the American people and wanting to convey to them, one, that he understands the problem and that he's doing something about it. It is a much lesser concern, the real actual economic markets. Of course, he wants lower gas prices. That would help him tremendously politically. But that message, and I think the volumes you cited to, do show it's really a political one. One thing I would point out for our industry, which is extremely helpful, I can't promise it will last, but it is super helpful, is that in the fall, when prices were higher, and in part of the summer as well, the president talked about potential antitrust problems within the motor fuel industry, and particularly at retail, and asked the FTC to investigate. The FTC has been looking at that. We've spoken with them. We've spoken with the White House. We've laid out all the market factors that go into this. Thankfully, we didn't hear that last night. The president did talk about antitrust, but in another context entirely. That's really good for our industry. Look, there's going to be more focus on energy and gas prices, but we want the focus to be in the right place, which is the basics of supply and demand. Hopefully, folks can do something about that. More supply is always a good thing for the industry, but we don't need them making unfounded claims about antitrust there. And thankfully, he didn't.
When you talk, so there were some various groups that were cited as, I don't want to say enemies, but, we weren't demonized as an industry, the fuels industry. There were others that were a little bit taken to task. Now, as we transition from a different kind of fuels, talking about EVs, there's also a dynamic in play there where the administration very much wants to transition to EVs, but at the same time, we have fossil fuels and the majority of people driving those vehicles. He talked about, once again, about the 500,000 EV chargers, and lower prices of EVs, lower the prices of the cost of EV vehicles so people can save on charging. Was there any takeaway that you saw from that, or in not discussing biofuels, that's worth us paying attention to?
There wasn't a lot new there, at least from what I heard. He's talked about the 500,000 charger goal. That's one of his highest profile goals during his first term, and he will keep talking about that. He did couch it this time, as you pointed out, in the context of, well, you have lower costs to refuel, that is to charge the vehicle, and not have to worry about gas if you're driving an electric vehicle. That certainly plays into where we are politically today and people's worries about gas prices. But there wasn't really a lot of new information there. In fact, one of the potential themes you could look at from the speech was old wine in new bottles. He was still pitching a lot of the things he's pitched for the last year that have been parts of his Build Back Better plan. But now, instead of pitching them the way he had been previously, he's talking about them as ways to reduce inflation and deal with those types of economic concerns.
Yeah, I think he said something about saving $80 a month in gas if you had an EV. Did I hear that correctly?
That's the number he cited. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how they get there, but...
Right. We did a little math, so that's why I brought it up.
So fuels kind of, there's not a bullseye on our back on that. And that's always good when you have a period when gas prices are elevated and people are concerned about gas prices. Let's look at some of the regulations and policies that could affect our business that were also mentioned. And we'll start with the raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Will that be gaining momentum on a federal level?
It will be gaining momentum in the political discussion. Minimum wage tends to be one of those issues that gets talked about a lot during election years and not nearly as much during non-election years. Democrats have wanted to raise the federal minimum wage for a long time, and it has been a long time since it was raised. So there will be a lot of talk. It is not something that has a legislative path to getting done. So we don't think that's going to take place this year.
What about tax rates for corporations and looking at some of those issues? Anything strike you that came out of the message?
Actually, one thing that struck me was that he didn't spend too much time on that. He certainly mentioned it. It's part of that package of Build Back Better ideas that have been out there for a while. And he did, very strongly make the pledge that people making under $400,000 a year won't pay a penny more in taxes. It was almost a George H.W. Bush read my lips moment in terms of a tax pledge. But there, too, he's dealing with a situation that legislation has been stalled in Congress because they can't get a majority in the Senate. And it's not clear what might change that dynamic. It's hard to see the State of the Union as being something that would change that dynamic. But they're clearly trying to make the case for it. And tax will have to be a big part of it, because for it to have any chance, you've got to pay for not necessarily all of it, but a lot of it.
And then we can get into inflation a little bit, he mentioned rising costs for food, for gas, for housing, pretty much everything. And then he also had mentioned a lot about, manufacturing, bringing a lot of it back to America made. How well do you think that message played out?
So, look, people want things to be made in America. That's a popular political line. It was striking to me in hearing how much detail he gave as to all the steel, all the guardrails, on highways, everything being made in America. I'm not really sure we have the capacity to do that. It would be great. We all want to manufacture more things in America, but I'm just not sure that's doable. I suppose we'll find out because they seem committed to it. But they are focused on inflation. That is top of mind in every poll you take of Americans out there. And, he was pitching things like weatherizing homes and lowering electricity bills as ways to get there. I'm not sure people are going to be convinced that the things that they wanted to do before there was inflation are magically the answers to inflation. We'll find out.
were there any subtle or direct red flags that we didn't discuss that we may want to think about as an industry that he talked about?
I don't think there were red flags per se. It was interesting that he talked about privacy very prominently, and in particular, children's privacy. I don't see that as a red flag for our industry. We have a coalition we started, the Main Street Privacy Coalition, that's advocated for federal law on this, in part because the states are doing it piecemeal. But anytime you get into that debate, there is some friction between where we are and other Main Street groups are versus some of the big tech and telecom companies, as well as some of the banks that consistently want exemptions for their own activity and to have all responsibility put on Main Street. So that's a danger as we get into that debate, but it's a good debate to have. I think we have the better of the policy and the politics on that. But it was interesting. It's not an issue that's been talked about much. So for the president to raise it very prominently was something new.
Speaking of coalitions, the Merchant Payments Coalition, which we founded, I think, 2006, 2005. Did we go back that far?
2005.
Sure.
Yes.
So we're combating swipe fees, credit card fees. Is there an opportunity to reinvigorate our swipe fee debate now that gas prices are nearing $4 a gallon? And that's
Credit card fees are a bigger part.
When gas prices go up, credit card companies get a decent amount of change from that. To put it
Absolutely.
Very simplistic.
Yes. So look, credit card fees are a multiplier of inflation because they're a percentage of the purchase price. So as prices go up, they go up more because of card fees. And that's a really problem dynamic that we've been talking about a lot. The Merchants Payments Coalition has been talking about a lot. Actually, the Merchants Payments Coalition just launched an advertising campaign to talk about how high the fees are, both spurred by the inflation dynamic, as well as by the fact that this April there are scheduled increases in the fees coming from Visa and MasterCard. So there's no question there will be a lot more discussion of those issues this year. And frankly, the president's discussion of antitrust was not specific to that area, but the thinking among the antitrust enforcement agencies like the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission certainly includes those card companies, as well as a lot of the popular focuses on the big technology platforms out there and what they mean on antitrust. So I do think there will be a lot more discussion of those fees and what they do to Main Street and to consumers.
You brought up one opportunity. Just want to briefly talk about that. More opportunities, and then talk about Governor Reynolds' rebuttal. But first, more opportunities for our industry. I took away possibly the discussion about big tech and privacy as being a good opportunity for NACS to continue to talk about our true age solution for age verification. And he also talked about immigration reform that is important to NACS. Can you talk a little bit about those two?
Yeah, so True Age obviously is a big initiative at NACS. It is helping solve some of the problems of today with age verification and the problems of tomorrow as we move toward things like mobile driver's licenses, ones that are in your phone as opposed to on a plastic card. We've got to be ready for those types of changes so that the industry can do what it has to do to comply and with age-restricted sales. There's also some other applications of True Age and its technology around verifying identity in a more and more digital world. And that's where there are some real opportunities on the privacy front. And there's been some press around that from those who are thinking ahead about how do we want the world to look as we do more things digitally. And frankly, even as we move to things potentially like more digital and cryptocurrencies and those sorts of things. So no question, that's an opportunity. Immigration, I think, is a little bit different. Yes, we've been talking about the need for more work-based visas. We're very narrow in the immigration space. Immigration is an incredibly politically fraught issue. There are large partisan divides between those who really emphasize border security and those who emphasize the need for a different kind of treatment of both immigrants who are here and immigrants who may be coming here. We're trying to stay out of those big debates because they historically don't tend to go anywhere. But there's no doubt we have a worker shortage, and more immigrants on legal, orderly work visas can be one part of helping with that problem. So certainly we're engaging in those discussions, but we will probably run and hide from the big picture immigration has to change debate.
What about Governor Reynolds' rebuttal? Was there anything there from the Republican side that is a opportunity or a concern related to our industry?
So these Republican or opposition party rebuttals date back decades now and are an accepted part of the tradition of the State of the Union. Republicans are very focused. They have a few criticisms of this administration that they're going to hit on time and again going through the election. Inflation, crime, border security, and now, especially given the events in Ukraine, weakness abroad. Those are the things Reynolds hit on. Those are the things they're going to hammer on day after day. Everybody might get tired of hearing them, but that's what they're going to try to do. And I think it's evidenced both by Governor Reynolds' speech, as well as by just recently, Senator McConnell made clear that Republicans in general don't plan on releasing a big new agenda talking about what they're going to do if they get the majorities in Congress. They're going to run on this being a referendum on the Democrats being in power and whether people like it or not. And we'll see how that goes.
Jeff, is it time for trivia?
It's time for trivia. Before we close, we have weekly
Doug is
trivia.
scared.
So, yeah, we have nice light music. Now let's talk about the heavy topic of gas prices. We talked about how earlier global situations can often increase gas prices. So the question for you, Doug, and we'll give you 4 choices. When did the U.S. national average for gas prices first hit $1 a gallon? Was it 1967, following the Six-Day War, 1974, following the October 1973 war? Was it 1979 during the Iranian Revolution? Or was it 1982 after the Lebanon War?
I'm going to say it was 74.
Not quite. It was...
I was wrong too, so...
1979, and the reason I know is my Sharona was blaring through my car radio. It was the summer I got my license, and gas prices hit $1 a gallon. A lot of stations didn't have that extra digit, so they were pricing half gallons because their dispensers only went up to 99.9. So age has its benefits on this question.
I can't believe I missed it.
Yeah, I picked 82. I was wrong. Doug, thank you for being our guest today. And for everyone who's listening, you can continue listening to Convenience Matters every week by subscribing to our podcast on your favorite podcast player and by checking us out at conveniencematters.com. We invited George Clooney to be on this episode, but he was busy making a movie somewhere, but we'll keep trying. So thanks, everyone.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.